quickly now. Go ahead. Yes, Brian.
It was an indentured servant that wasn't given the land that they were promised, and he led the biggest rebellion.
Well, I'm going to fill in a little bit on that, Barnard. I'm just going to fill in a little bit on that. Bacon's rebellion was a rebellion of indentures, former indentured servants who were unable to get land, led by a planter. Indentured servants that had pushed the frontier, antagonized the Native Americans, and looked to the government of Virginia for help. Finding none, they vented their anger against the governor by kind of sacking Jamestown and burning buildings, and this is a significant insurrection that really highlights the potential danger of continuing to bring indentured servants. And is one of the reasons why maybe plantation owners look to African slavery to replace indentured servants. I mean, we talked about African slavery, kind of extensively. And we did point this out, that the African slave trade was a terrible thing. And that people were captured on the west coast of Africa and kidnapped and then sold, into slavery and then transported across the Middle Passage. And they arrived in large numbers in British North America, and they went to the plantations, Virginia and Maryland, and eventually into the Carolinas. However, the majority of the slave trade went to the Caribbean. Only about 400,000 slaves arrived in British North America. Most of the people captured went to the Caribbean. Now, the slaves that did come to America eventually established kind of a unique American culture that you should probably read about a little bit in your book. So quickly now, as the hour is late, let's go to New England. And in talking about New England, we talked lots about the fertile nature of New England families. That New England was defined as large families, family units, people settled in towns, the foster family, the importance of religion, settling in an organized and orderly fashion. That New England expanded in an orderly manner. The Chesapeake did not. The Chesapeake was random. New England was organized. In the Chesapeake, it was unhealthy. You had blended families, no grandparents, no fathers, no mothers, half-sisters, half-brothers, step-sisters, step-brothers. These were things that defined the South. In New England, you had intergenerational relationships. Children knew their parents, parents knew their parents, they all lived together, they supported each other, and they pushed for the sense of mission. But we did mention that eventually the spirit and enthusiasm for that sense of mission fades. And we talked about reasons why. We talked about the alignment. We were just talking about this. But one of the things that I did mention to you, something called the halfway covenant, is on the test. It's part of kind of what we were talking about. The halfway covenant was an arrangement by which the children and grandchildren of the elect could still get church membership. And it is kind of a symbol, Wiccan, of kind of the decline in fervor for religion, this halfway covenant. So the halfway covenant is kind of talked about in chapter 4 in your text, but it's part of what we were talking about in chapter 5. One thing that I would say is you might also want to look at the Salem witches when you read. Something that we did not talk about in class, the Salem witches. A significant part of one of the chapters talks about that, so you might want to take a look at that. To leave New England, we would say this, that what defined New England was Calvinism, soil, and climate. And we did say that, remember, the people that wanted to make money in New England turned to the sea. That doesn't mean you couldn't have a successful farm and take care of yourself, but if you wanted to prosper, you turned to the sea. Now, the last part of what will be on the test is the material that we have just recently been talking about, and that is the commonalities that I don't know if commonality is the right word, as much as the basis for sort of common thinking was established amongst these diverse colonies. And we talked about a number of things. And one thing that we talked about was the rapid population growth. And we said that central to the rapid population growth was the availability of land. And the availability of land also promoted immigration. People kept coming to colonial North America. And we said that the people that came there were often diverse. And we talked about the major two the biggest non-English group to come to colonial North America were the Africans. 17 to 20% of the population was African. The biggest two non-African European groups to come to colonial North America were who? Yes, go ahead, Ben. The Germans and the Scots-Irish. Who was bigger?
Germans.
Scots-Irish. Scots-Irish slightly bigger than the Germans. What section of colonial America was the most diverse? What section of colonial America was the most diverse? New England, middle, or south? Yes, middle. What was the least diverse? New England. The south had the Africans. The least diverse was New England. What did most people despite that diversity, what did most people in colonial America do for a living? JRRJ. Farmers. Right? They were farmers. Most people were farmers. Now, land was widely available, so most of those farmers were able to sustain themselves. So colonial America did not have a significant impoverished underclass of people. Nor did colonial America have a titled nobility, which really defines the colonies. One other thing I would look into is something called the triangular trade. There's a discussion of that in your book, and I would take a look at that, the triangular trade. Now, the last thing that we talked about, and the last thing on the test is religion. And that kind of takes us up to where we were today. We talked about, the declining piety, what sparked the Great Awakening, what was the Great Awakening and religious revival, and what resulted from the Great Awakening. And the big result that it looks like is asked about on the test is the division between the old lights and the new lights. What did the new lights want? I mean, what would make the new lights the new lights? We just said this today. Go ahead, Aaron.
They wanted like enthusiastic preachers, they didn't know about.
Yeah, they're the ones that really clung to the Great Awakening. They wanted that emotional, kind of demonstrative type of preaching and teaching, etc. The old lights started to fear it, right? And so we talked a little bit about that. Oh, what section of the country were you more likely to be able to read if you lived in? What was the most literate people's group? Yeah, well, we're part of the North. New England, why so?
Because they
Reading the Bible was important. Okay, all right. Those are the highlights of what you might need to know for your test. Ben, you look frustrated by these highlights. No, you're not frustrated.
Hand hurts.
You're happy, your hand hurts. You wrote a lot of things down.
Yeah.
All right, I know this is a little later than I promised you, 20 after, I'm sorry. But that should be it. If you have any other questions between now and Friday, let me know. I look at this test, I can't imagine anybody missing a question.